We're live.
Great, welcome back. We're here at the Basic Needs Budget, and Tom Kveck, we welcome you to this conversation and look forward to working with you on this. And you are, we are giving the floor to you. So it's good to see you. Long time no see.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. I hope you can, you're okay. We've got audio working all right. I have 3 documents that I submitted, so I'll reference those and pull those up. But just prefatory to all of that, my involvement in calculating basic needs budget metrics and stats has been very limited since the original legislative study in 1999. So Joint Fiscal has handled that on their own. They'll occasionally come to me with questions or technical issues or wanting second or third opinions on things. And so I've touched in from time to time, but it's not like I've been down in the weeds on all of the updates and all of what's happened to Joint Fiscal.
Right.
Just speaking from the broad perspective regarding the conditions that prompted the original study, I'd like to pull up that study. So I'll just share the screen, and you all have copies of this, but let's see if I can get to that without too much trouble.
Well, as it turns out, Ellen is the only one with a real copy.
Well, Tom might have a copy.
Tom, do you have it?
It got printed out on his printer on Halloween in 1999. I was there.
Yes.
And he was one of the few people at the time that actually had a color printer all his.
Oh, I remember you telling me.
And that's why it's printed on one-sided, because back in the day, you couldn't do two-sided with personal home color printers. Right, Tom?
That's absolutely right, Ellen.
I'm not surprised that he had a cutting edge printer.
Well, I like to try any new thing, and if it's a dud, I don't
for
use
sure.
it. But, color printing was a really good thing for economic analysis, where you like to show things with charts. And yeah, that is Ellen, why I saved a couple of copies, is because anything printed in color was kind of a big deal back then.
So it's amusing that your first chart here, Thomas, has no color. I mean, very modest color.
Well, yeah, but there's some. There's a page later on that was more important for the color distinction, and we'll get to that. But
Right. Okay, it's yours.
The thing that gave rise to this study was concern and consideration of changing the minimum wage and the relationship of the minimum wage to a livable income, or a wages that would allow a decent living. And that concept was the basis of the original federal minimum wage in 1938. And Franklin Roosevelt said at the time, and this is quoted on page 4 of this document, that no business which depends for its existence on paying less than living wages to its workers has any right to continue in this country. By living wages, I mean more than a bare subsistence level. I mean the wages of a decent living. And that's obviously a relative term. What a decent living was in 1938 is very different from what you would consider it to be today, or it was in 1999 when this analysis was done. And there are political components and relative components of norms and such. There are technological changes. There are lots and lots of things about the way people live and the things that we think are essential and not essential that have changed. So it's not like there's some right or wrong to a lot of these things. They're value judgments and subjective judgments, and not an easy challenge that you all have to deal with. But the,
Before you move on, I just want to point out, having represented the minimum wage to my colleagues in the Senate on the floor, he also said, and I think actually it fits in with what our work more in a more focused way. He said, Roosevelt said the minimum wage was the minimum amount you needed to live on. Not just that it was a decent, he expanded on this many times, obviously, because he introduced us to the notion of a minimum wage, but he said it was the minimum amount you needed to live on.
right, but the idea of what you need to live on, if you look at different countries all over the world and you look at norms and you know, what people need to live on, you would get widely divergent measurements of what the minimum would be. And
But we're talking about here.
what's that?
Yes, but we're talking about here in Vermont.
Yes, that's right. That's right. But I mean, that is something that you're processing as a committee in a relative way. And this came up in 1999, as Ellen alluded to, when we talked about the food allowance. And the first version of this that we ran, we used the thrifty USDA food plan, and the weekly amount for a female aged 20 to 50 was lower than the daily per diem maximum food allowance for Vermont legislators. And when the committee saw that,
That was low.
yeah, they said, that's, you know, you shouldn't, our per diem, you know, shouldn't be more than the weekly amount that we think somebody needs to live on. And so they directed us to use the moderate food plan, which was $1.10 more than the daily maximum food allowance. So that's a part of that, the third paragraph down and what I've got on the screen. And so it is, you know, but those are all judgment calls that need to be made. And Allison, to your question about how many people, how many Vermonters this affected, back in 1999, we estimated that about 60,000 Vermonters currently lived in a household where at least one adult was working full time and did not earn a livable income. So that was about 10% of all of families in Vermont at the time. But yeah, so I don't know what the current number is, but you know, that's something we get. But
that would be interesting to find out an update of that number versus then. So that would create that chart that.
Yeah, that's a question we can ask, another add to our demographic question.
Right. But this, you know, it was in response to what had been growing inequality since about 1980. Inequality in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, inequality was generally becoming smaller, less divergent over that whole period. Beginning about 1980, inequality started to increase, and this chart, growth in real household income, this was in the 1999 report, showed since 1989, the divergence in real household income by income class. And we look at these data every year because these census data are used in estimating income sensitivity for the education fund property tax rate. But the data, I ran data, let's see if I can get to that. Here, let's see here just a second, if I can move this around. I've got the. Okay, since 1999, we have the same basic, divergence. The richer the quintile or the 5%, top 5%, which is reported separately, it goes down in fairly identical progression, except the poorest were even further left behind. So you actually had real household income declining by 8% for the lowest 20%, poorest 20% of the population. If you look at the ratio of the top to bottom, there's a paragraph in the original executive summary that points out that, you know, in 1981, it was 14.7 times higher than the lowest, the ratio. It had grown to 24% by 1999. Well, here's the latest data, and it's up to more than 32 times the average household income of the top 5% relative to the lowest 20%. So the conditions that gave rise to trying to understand this issue and see if there were anything from a policy perspective that can be done. And there are limits to what can be done at a state level, but there's still things that could be meaningful. And but those conditions are worse today than they were in 1999. One of the things, and Ellen mentioned this and others, that was really significant about this study in 1999 is it was the first time that the interplay between public benefits and minimum wages was teased out. There have been a lot of academic studies on minimum wages and the like, but none looked at that interplay, because what we found is that as the minimum wage went up, and this was the chart where the color was important, even though we didn't use very many. There were times that the minimum wage could go up, and yet the actual income, monetized value of the public benefits would decline because of benefit cliffs. And Deb Brighton was the person that was, who identified this on the team. And she got the data on all the various public benefits and did the tax interplay. And both of those are things that both state and federal public policy can affect, because you want to have incentives for people to earn more in the workplace at each minimum wage level. If you see here also how taxes grow, they're below the line kind of thing, but how that also plays into how much income people have. So anyway, that was a really important component of the original analysis. So, there's just a couple of a lot of the findings of this old study. What did Patrick say? Since the beginning of time, or something like that. I hate it when people refer to work I've done like that, but anyway, I was there at the creation, and anyway,
Hey, Tom, this is Rich Westman. We both predate this.
That's right. That's right, Rich.
Yeah, there are three of you here that predate it, and well, four of you, including Doug.
Right. But anyway, a lot of the findings and recommendations are still relevant, and finding creative policy ways, and also trying to influence and affect federal policies that that are public benefits, so you don't have these benefit cliffs, is an ongoing and a really important thing to do. The other thing is just, in the statistical world, there has been an explosion of, and there's still a lot to come, of data sources that are based on big data metrics. So the large data aggregators like Google and Apple and the like have statistics that have not been widely used that would be very useful for this kind of thing. And we found some of these during the pandemic when they freely shared some of the data on mobility and things like that, that we used as important indicators of when people were going back to work, how many people were traveling into Vermont from other states and which states they were coming from, and various things like that. There may be creative ways to combine some of those data sources and have very, very local information on how much people travel. There's also data on gas prices and things like that that's much more robust and local, that's based on some of this, some of the big data that's available. And so it's important to update and change and review options for getting more accurate data on this. And it's useful and important to do that. So anyway, I think those are kind of the general points that I wanted to make. I'm available to Joint Fiscal, of course, if they need any support or want any input on this, and to the committee if there are specific questions. One of the things when I looked at Pat's chart that I found interesting, he had a chart on how the minimum wage had increased since 2010 to 2022, and how the livable income had changed from 2010 to 2022. And I just ran the numbers on the CPI for the same period. So the livable income increased 26% over that particular time period. The CPI, and this also speaks to Representative Burrow's earlier question and comment, CPI increased 34%. So the CPI went up by more than the livable income, and the minimum wage increased 56% over that same period, which is consistent with trying to get the minimum wage closer to a livable wage level. But I thought it was interesting that the basic needs budget livable wage had increased by less than the CPI. I think it'd be worth going back further, looking at the data all the way from 1999 and trying to see by specific year. But maybe maybe it's finding that the mix of things that very low income people purchase is different and hasn't had as much inflation as the general CPI. But it wouldn't necessarily be an intuitive guess that I'd make. So I just throw that out there.
Tom, what was the first percent the livable income had increased? What percent before you did the CPI at 34%?
So I just ran these on Pat's data. So
Yep.
We might want to confirm those with Pat, but 26% is what I got.
Okay, right. I just
livable income percent change, and the CPI was 34.2
yeah, I got that.
over the same period. Yeah.
And that was 2010 to 22?
Yeah, and I think it's worth doing some other time periods and looking at how that tracks, just to see, because 2022 was a year with a lot of inflation, accelerating inflation, and be interesting to see how that looks over time, because it might be, you'd say, well, gee, why should we just do this? If there's a CPI, we can kind of assume that it's the same, but it doesn't look like that's the case. And I think that's maybe speaks to the mix of things that are in there, maybe, or the approach. Anyway, I just throw that.
Tom, can I just interrupt and ask you a question? Isn't it fair to wonder the extent to which the balance of what we would call line items in the basic needs budget, how does that match with CPI's distribution of contributing factors? I'm not sure they align that closely.
Well, there's very detailed CPI sectors, so there's about 300 different, categories. So we could align some, but that of course is a national metric. So some of it is national versus regional, but still, I think it's just an interesting line of inquiry that might be useful, because people think of inflation in terms of CPI usually, or personal consumption index, deflator, various things like that. And this is measuring something different, or attempting to measure something different.
Isn't it also the case, Tom, that the market basket of what's included in the CPI changes over time, right?
It does. And so too with livable income, as different things become available. I think in 1999, we would have had a landline telephone in there. And I don't know what's in the telecommunications mix now, but that certainly wouldn't be there, but a cell phone would be. Internet access, that's another, again, what's essential and what isn't and all that. And then what's the coverage of some of those things in Vermont? So the Vermont rural might be different than urban on some things like that. But it just speaks to the need to update it. And like the CPI, the mix of things in there will change over time.
And anybody have questions for Tom? I forgive my ignorance on this, Tom, but fools rush in where angels fear to tread on questions. And I'm always the fool. So what is the difference between the livable income and the livable wage? You use
just annualized.
Okay, it's just okay.
Annual amount. So you back into it based on full-time work and you get down to a wage level. But
right, okay.
You did the first study, we were just looking at kind of annual income.
Right. And maybe you, because you have sort of big vision of the whole economy, we in the legislature get different groups giving us different standards for what a livable wage is. So Earhart would always come in with a housing livable wage that was quite different from this. So could you expound a little bit on the different livable wages that are calculated or that are out there that we're often presented with?
Yeah, I think Joyce is going to go into that in more
Sorry.
detail. But there's a tendency for entities that are trying to do this for the whole country to have to use metrics that are available for every single county, state, whatever level they're doing it at. And there are times that there can be a local metric that is really good, but that's unique to that region. And so, there are differences there. And anything that's unique about the state and the data get pretty thin in a small state when you're breaking it into a lot of different groups. And that's where use of something like big data can rectify that, because you can get an enormous sample size with even a small, a detailed breakout in a small state. But I think you'll find, Joyce will present this, that, there's a lot of variation up and down. It's not like there's, one group that's always higher than another on every family configuration or whatever. It all depends on what the inputs are, how you're weighting them, all of this as to that. And you're really down in the weeds with each of those decisions. We spent a better part of 8 or 9 months, probably doing at least 6 months doing the original 1999 study. We also did some modeling around minimum wage impacts at the same time, but it's pretty involved to, go through each one and look at all the different alternatives. And
Worker. And then the last question I just have for you, I'd just like to have you clarify what I thought I heard you say, is the income gap, is the disparity income, I am assuming it's only growing in Vermont. Did I hear you say that the income gap between 1999 and today has grown? I thought I heard you say that somewhere in this.
Yes, this chart.
Okay, I can't really read that chart, so
you can't read it. Okay, so it's
I'm just blind. So but today it is higher, the income gap is higher, I assume, than it was in 90.
Yes.
Yeah,
By
so
a
this is,
significant-
so these are national statistics that are presented here. The,
And this will be on our website, so we can go look at it.
yeah, sure, sure.
And is this part of your presentation today? So it'll be on our website. Okay, great.
Yeah, there are three
I'll look at it
assessments.
when I can actually see it. Okay.
But
Yeah,
Tom,
is
put that other one back up, because I think there may be a confusion about that, this gap here, whoops.
Oh, back to the gap, okay.
Yeah. This gap here.
Is that 1999?
This is the
No, that's
living
income.
wage number for this configuration of 2 working parents and and 2 children.
Right.
So this is saying, if the minimum wage is at $5.75, $6.50, $7.50, $8.50, right? The legislature wanted to say, well, we are interested in increasing the minimum wage. What would it look like if we did it at, 5?
These increments,
At these increments? How would that impact people's benefits? So this number here, this line, this dotted line, is the calculated livable wage for 2 working parents, 2 children. And then this shows you at this hourly, what are you getting, what are your net wages, what are your public benefits, and then where's the gap? Meaning, like, even with public benefits,
Right.
there's still a gap with what you need to.
And that is
Yes.
a different gap than what I was referring to.
Correct.
Got
I
it.
think it's important.
But it's a critically important gap
Yes,
because
yes.
even with
Right. And
public
this-
assistance, people are not earning enough to live
Right, and
on.
so this is basically saying that for that 2 working parents, 2 children, you do not hit the point, this is a 99, where your wages and your taxes meet that livable wage number until you hit 1450. That was in 1999. That number is much higher, obviously now, especially on some of these housing numbers. But at this point, you're not getting any public benefits up until, and you drop off at 1250 completely. Right, so it was just a point of information to really understand, because again, on the policy levers, you have the revenue side that you can pull, and you have the expense side that we can pull. So,
Yeah, and it would be great to update this chart and maybe we
well,
have.
that's what is on the 2020
That's on this
tax
20
commission.
Right.
One that I pointed out, those
Right.
got updated by Deb.
Right.
So they're close
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah, okay, great.
That's per worker though, right? The hourly wages, the 50,000
Yes. Yes.
is like the combined incomes of the two.
Or actually, which
Is that
one
right?
is this
Yeah, 2 working.
the 2 working parents?
Yeah.
Yeah, and 2
So they're
parents.
each making that amount.
Right, but the
That's
50,000 in 1999 was combined income. Had
Right.
to-
And the net wage is after tax income. We just show that tax line below the zero so that you get an idea of how, as your wages go up, you're also end up paying more taxes even before you reach the livable income level. And so that was, that at the state level, there's a little bit of policy decision-making that could affect that. And that's why we put that in there to show that. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions for Tom, or shall we move to Joyce? Tom, thanks a million. Richie, did you?
No, so it was updated in 2021.
The graphs were in the tax structure commission. Deb worked on that, and she did, at least there's some, I don't think she necessarily did it on all these different family sizes, but there was.
And what I'd say for that, that I'm sure they used data from the year before.
Right.
And anything pre-COVID, when it comes to real estate, is completely outdated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, useful.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because the run up in real estate during COVID was phenomenal.
Right.
It's changed, the landscape has changed considerably.
Yes.
Joyce, would you join us? Please, thank you for joining us today.
Good morning.
And Tom, thank you. This is great. The table setting our table's getting fuller and fuller.
Okay, good luck with it all.
Thank you. We're gonna need it.
Oh, good. Good morning, everyone. I'm Joyce Manchester with the Joint Fiscal Office, and I'm going to share my screen. Okay, I'm going to be talking today about the purpose of the basic needs budget and the reason for thinking hard about the purpose from the JFO perspective is that we have to make a lot of choices as to what data we are using to put into the calculation of the basic needs budget and the livable wage. And so if we had more guidance as to what type of household we should be thinking about when we make those data choices, it would be immensely useful. Before I get started on my slides, I wanted to say just a few words about some of the discussion. I did follow along remotely for the earlier presentation, so that was very helpful. Thank you. And a few points about the discussion that just took place. So I remember doing the chart that looks at minimum wage adjusted for the CPI going way back for the minimum wage study committee, a summer study committee,
Yeah.
which was
A while ago, Helen had and Michael were.
Yes, yes. But the thing I would note there is that the CPI is well known to overstate inflation, especially the further back you go.
Oh.
Because it did not adjust very rapidly for changes in the bundle of goods. So it assumed that people bought the same relative quantities of certain goods for a long period of time before those bundles got adjusted. So there's been a lot of work over the last 2 decades, I would say, to make that adjustment happen more quickly. So more recently, the CPI has become a more accurate measure of true inflation, what people really face. But back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, it was not a good representation. So when you instead use the PCE deflator, the personal consumption expenditures price index, you get a better overall picture of long-term trends in the livable wage or the minimum wage. So I would.
So what was that? What was that called?
It's called the PCE price index. And that is today the Federal Reserve Board's preferred measure of inflation. So when they're talking about should they continue to raise the Fed funds rate and so forth, they're most carefully looking at the PCE price index. Okay, the other point I wanted to make is that the choice of time period influences the trend that you see. So starting in 2010 means a recession. You're at sort of the low point of the recession. It's been going on for 2 years, since 2008, 2010. And then you're rising up to 2022, which was boosted very much by the COVID federal aid. And so it's really, in my opinion, it's a very distorted period of time to be looking at. So I would encourage looking at different time periods and using a better inflation measure. Okay, there was some discussion of looking at the livable wage and minimum wages and so forth after taxes and after public assistance, which I think is really important. I was at CBO back in the day when they were beginning to look at the distribution of household income after taxes and transfers, is the way that they refer to it. And it really does make a big difference if you think about just gross income versus adjusted for taxes and transfers. And finally, Tom was just saying that there's a lot to be said for looking at local metrics. Yes, that's absolutely true if the local metrics are available. The problem is that Vermont doesn't have a lot of specific local metrics. And even if we do, they're based on a very small data set because we have a small population in Vermont. And there is an advantage to looking at some of the nationwide calculations of the living wage or the basic needs budget. And that is that you can actually compare across states to see how Vermont's livable wage might line up with other states' livable wage because they're using a consistent set of data to make those estimates. So there are pros and cons. Okay, so let's get on with the slides here. Okay, so here's what I'll be talking about. So the question is, for whom are basic needs budgets constructed? That's a big question. And should state and federal programs that support households be included? I'm going to be talking about child care subsidies, for example. Currently, the CCFAP program helps families up to 350% of the federal poverty level, which for a family of, let's see, I just happen to have some figures here. For a family of 3 means $87,000, okay? So a family up to $87,000 can expect to get state help on paying for childcare. And if we can't include public assistance, we would have to charge that family for the full cost of childcare, okay? And it's only going to get worse because under the new childcare bill, those childcare subsidies will apply to families up to 575% of the federal poverty level, which for a family of 3 in 2023 was about 143,000. Okay, so state support programs for childcare really go quite high.
They have a long tail on the income front.
Income scale, yes. So that's something to keep in mind. Secondly, who uses the basic needs budget report and why? I have some information that we gathered back in the late fall of 2022 when we were preparing the 2023 report. At the time, we found no legislators that said they were using the basic needs budget. I heard Senator Clarkson say 6 committees are using it, so.
I'm not sure 6 committees are using it. 6 committees, it would make sense. And I wasn't thinking about JFC. I was just thinking about House Human Services, House Appropriations, House Ways and Means, Senate, the obvious ones. We do, that is actually not true. I mean, we refer to every year it's presented, we get a report and we consider it. And we certainly worked on it with, as you know, because we worked together on minimum wage. So we do use it, maybe not as fully as we should be, but at least some of our committees are using it. And I think House General also obviously is, maybe 6 to 8 committees have a jurisdiction that would likely use it. I guess that's a better way of putting it.
Okay, so maybe you're using it as a reference point.
Yes, I think I meant it in that capacity, which is are the committees that you would think would access it and use it.
Okay.
And rely on it. And why aren't they if they aren't using it?
Yes.
That's, I think, the key question.
Yes, good question. Okay, next we'll talk about how defining the purpose would affect our choice of data inputs. And finally, how do other family budget measures or living wage calculators compare? So we will get there. I just wanted to emphasize for the 3rd time this morning what the statute says. So essentials needed to run a household. That is stated clearly in one part of the statute. And secondly, the amount of money needed by a Vermont household to maintain a basic standard of living. Okay, so the point here is how do you put all those things in your head? A basic standard of living and the essentials needed to run a household. What should that tell us about how we think about the household that we are representing here? So 2 questions. Should JFO report the expenses of a household with low income or a household with moderate or average income? And we do have to make those choices. Are we looking at average transportation expenses or a low income rural household transportation expenses? You've already talked about the food budget, the thrifty versus the moderate.
For teenagers and young people.
Yes, although I think Pat's point about no childcare for the teenagers, instead they're eating. Yeah, well, okay. But yes, all those are certainly valid questions. And then should we continue to ignore state and federal programs that support households with lower and sometimes moderate incomes? Okay, so who uses the basic needs budget report and why? So as I said, we were looking at who was using it as of the fall of 2021. Some groups use the basic needs budget to define the earnings necessary to live in Vermont, okay? So if a household doesn't earn at least the basic needs budget amount, then presumably it does not have the earnings necessary to live in Vermont. And again, government support plays no role. So in fact, a family could live in Vermont and take advantage of government support and supposedly do just fine. So again, the question is, what are we thinking about here? Okay, other groups refer to it as the subsistence budget needs of families. So that to me is a lower level. They argue that the household benefit programs should provide support equal to those subsistent budget needs. That comes from Reach Up. So that's a different way of thinking. Some employers, Hunger Mountain Food Co-op and the designated agencies use the basic needs budget as a guide for setting wage levels. So again, they're actually taking the number as a meaningful number and thinking about that when they set wages. Some groups argue the minimum wage should be increased to at least match the livable wage. This has been discussed in committees and so forth. The minimum wage lies below the livable wage. Of course, the livable wage is specifically defined to be that two-person adult household, no kids, one-bedroom apartment, And is that appropriate if you think about what is the minimum wage and who is supporting households on a minimum wage, right? So it's all very complicated, and I guess it's hard to think that one number is going to satisfy all these needs.
So Joyce, before you leave this slide, how do you know who's using it?
So
when you say some groups are using it this way, some are,
yes.
How do you know?
So we did a Google search on the basic needs budget and the report and so forth, and we tried to see if there was anything on the web, and indeed we found a bunch of stuff on the web. Some of this was word of mouth because some people had served on the Hunger Mountain Co-op board and knew about wages there. I'm sure I'm missing a lot of groups that
It's
are.
also the case the Hunger Mountain Food Co-op and the City Market are both union shops. So part of that is negotiated, and they use that in negotiations too.
Mm-hmm.
I do love it that they Googled it.
But you didn't find the reference to Vermont training program using it as an eligibility criteria for being able to have those program dollars for training.
Right? That's embedded right in the statute too. So it is interesting she used that term, Richie, right in the middle of this lawsuit that is going on now in federal court.
I know.
90% of searches are done by Google. Anyway.
Yes, it's true. Is it because they're better, or is it because they are the dominant search engine?
That is
Or they
that is the question, Joyce. You should be on the, jury there.
Okay, how does defining the purpose of the BNB affect JFO's choice of data inputs? So 3 examples here. We've already talked about the food budget, the low cost or thrifty versus the moderate cost. We currently use the moderate cost. We'll be talking about some other commonly used measures of basic needs budgets and living wages. Those measures use the low cost food plan, so that would matter a bit. The cost of housing depends on the choice of housing category, and I know you touched on this as well. We're using a 1-bedroom for both a single adult and 2 adults. We could be using the studio apartment fair market rent instead. Again, that would make a difference. And the cost of health.
It might also make a difference as to how long people stay coupled.
Yes, if they follow the dictates of the.
Right, exactly. How long
budget.
a couple survive as a couple in a studio apartment?
Yes.
Well, that's the single adult assumption, right? Because
Also for
the couple one is also, the 2 is
A
also.
single would be more, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean,
Yes. And finally, I did want to bring up the cost of health insurance. So the current measure, as we calculate it, includes the cost of employer-sponsored health insurance. And we know that lower income people are less apt to have employer-sponsored insurance, meaning that they probably go to Health Connect. And then they get a subsidy from the government. And if we can't count that subsidy from the government, are we reflecting the true cost?
right.
So all these questions continue to soar. Okay. How do other family budget or living wage calculators compare? Okay, so we did a pretty good look at what other calculators are out there, and we found two that seem to be the most commonly used calculators. They're each a little bit different from the full basic needs budget setup that we use here in Vermont. Neither calculator provides an estimate for a single adult who shares housing with another unrelated adult. And of course, that's the basis for the living wage. Okay. And they're expressed in different dollars because at the time we pulled the data, they were coming at different times. So the basic needs budget that we have in our heads, what is it, 1533? Yeah. In my head, that's in 2022 dollars. So that's now a year old, right? And the numbers that I'll be talking about are stated in 2021 and 2020 dollars, I think. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at those two calculators. The first is called the living wage calculator, even though it doesn't do Vermont's living wage. Okay. It's been done at MIT for a number of years. It's done for every state in the country by county. It uses a consistent set of data sources over time and across the country, which means it's very logical to compare Vermont to other states. So that's in its favor. The living wage is the hourly rate that an individual in a household must earn to support his or herself and family. Again, assume working full-time, 2,080, just as we do, 2,080 hours per year. They have individuals, households with 1 or 2 working adults, and 0 to 3 children. So it's a similar setup.
Does it come up with a similar result?
Yeah, we're going to look.
2022?
Yeah, we're going to look in just a minute. Yeah, that's the next bullet. Relatively close, but higher or lower in some cases, depending on the household configuration. And we had to do a little bit of massaging to get the rural and urban comparisons because they do it by county, not by distinguish rural from urban. So we'll see that in just a second. The second comparable calculator is called the Family Budget Calculator from the Economic Policy Institute. That's in 2020 dollars here and measures the income a family needs in order to attain a modest yet adequate standard of living. So that's I don't know, in my mind, that's a little bit more precise than the essentials or what was the other term? Sufficient, whatever, yeah. Okay, and they have 10 family types, 1 or 2 adults, 0 to 4 children for counties and metro areas in the US. They think that their measure is more accurate and complete than either the federal poverty measure coming out of census or the supplemental poverty measures, but that's their opinion. Okay, and the urban hourly wage is higher than Vermont's basic needs budget. The rural wage is lower in most cases. So here we go. Oh no, okay, maybe we should go right to this slide. Let's do that. Okay, so here is the comparison that was included in the 2022 basic needs budget report. So I lifted this directly from there. So what? We'll find it. It's way at the back, way at the back.
Is it in the index or is it in
an appendix?
It's in the appendix.
It's almost the last page.
Thank you, page 30.
Yeah. So just to see where we are, you can see the basic needs budget is in green, light green or dark green for urban or rural. And you can see the 2 adults case is the living wage that we like to refer to. And it's the average of the $15.11 and the $15.55, right? So we take the average of the urban and rural to get the defined in statute living wage for Vermont. So that's the 1533. Okay, but now let's compare the basic needs budget for these various types to the MIT and the Policy Institute measures. Again, if we were to do this more accurately, we should probably blow up the EPI numbers because they are expressed in 2020 dollars, right? So there's been inflation since 2020. So think that those numbers should be a little bit higher than expressed on.
What does EPI do it every 2 years,
Both of them do it every year.
why?
When we pull, this is what we got.
So they're way behind.
Well, we were pulling in 2021. So.
So we could update this for our next meeting. It sounds like we have EPI data that would be up to date.
Yes,
Okay.
that's true. Okay, yes, so you can see for the single adult, for example, if we first look at the urban hourly wages per person, we are in the middle. We're at $20. MIT is at almost $20. EPI is at $23. So that's a comparison. But if you look at the rural wages, we're at almost $19. MIT is at almost 17. EPI is at about 20. So you can see we're definitely in the ballpark, but not exactly with them. And then looking at, for example, one adult, one child, we're at $35.50. That's on the low side for the urban households. They're at 40 and 42. If we look at rural, we are at 31. And again, they're above that a bit, 34 and 32.50. But you can see if you go down the different households, sometimes we're in the middle, sometimes we're low, sometimes we're high. So
Yeah, it's just interesting as somebody who lives in what is considered a rural area. I mean, the only thing that really differs is the cost of housing. Food is the same. I mean, I don't know what the big difference is. Insurance is the same, food is the same.
transportation is going to be different.
But transportation, it may or may not be, depending, again, on what you're driving.
Right.
It is, I would say the only two key differences are housing and transportation. Everything else is kind of a consistently, similarly expensive cost. So it's so puzzling to me that.
If I could just add to that thought, I would be interested to know when we're looking at urban and rural in those assumptions, childcare.
Erin, is that you?
Yep, it's Erin.
Yeah, okay.
Here, let me I can turn on my video.
It's okay, we can hear you.
Okay, so you were speaking to the differences in assumptions between urban and rural in potentially being housing and transportation, but I would be interested to know what childcare cost differences we're looking at. As in a rural community, there may be a lack of childcare options, and therefore that would drive the cost of it between those two options.
Sure. So anyone who's interested can look at the full gory details in the 2022 Basic Needs Budget Report. I'm looking, for example, on page 13, which shows 2 adults and 2 children with 2 wage earners. If you look at childcare in the urban setting, it is $1,937, so $1,937. In the rural, it's expected to be lower at $1,627. Part of that, as I recall, is because more rural families use family-based, or it's called home-based care rather than center-based care, which tends to be less, the family-based care tends to be less expensive. But that's based on data on who uses what kind of care, how much.
Great, thank you.
That situation could have changed, right, since COVID.
It's
very well
really changed, yeah.
Yes. But if you want to see the difference between urban and rural, these many pages of different household types.
It's a rich report.
Good comparisons.
Where do heating and cooling fall in? What categories?
That's under housing, I believe. That's not only, your mortgage or your rent, but it's also heating and cooling.
And lighting would be part of it. Given our time, Joyce, let's.
Yeah, I'm about done. I was going to offer a few methodology differences among the 3 calculators, and that's covered on this one slide. There are more details on the following slide that I will not take time to go through, but I thought these were the major methodology differences. So again, we've talked about food. Do we use the moderate cost plan as in Vermont, or do we use the low cost food plan as MIT and EPI do? Housing, we've already talked about, 1 bedroom versus studio. Transportation, there are different sources of transportation data. We have chosen to use the National Household Travel Survey to give us miles traveled and cost of maintenance and per mile expense. MIT uses the Consumer Expenditure Survey, where the Census Bureau asks people directly how much do you spend on transportation in a given period. So it's a different approach. EPI uses the Housing and Transportation Affordability Index, and that's coming from the Center for Neighborhood Technology. So it turns out you get different answers depending on which data set you look at, and they differ quite significantly. So who knows what is the most accurate, but there are choices to be made here. We've talked about healthcare already. Neither MIT nor EPI includes dental care, whereas Vermont does, so that's a little bit of a difference. And both MIT and the Vermont estimator assume employer-sponsored insurance, but EPI uses the Affordable Care Act exchanges, which would be Vermont Health Connect in our case. And then finally, the basic needs budget assumes that 5% of income goes to savings, whereas the other two do not have any itemized cost for savings, although they have an other category that includes lots of stuff. And if you add up all of the Vermont estimated other stuff, you get to something that's very close to their other category. So it's maybe included. Okay, as I said, this next slide has a few other methodology differences. Where do taxes come from? How are they calculated? You can read that on your own. But otherwise, I will say, yes, we are left with these questions and we would love to have further guidance. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I'm so glad that you brought up this, the MIT calculator and EPI calculators, because I think it underscores the thing for us to understand is that there are always going to be different data sets that we would make choices on. Back in 1999 and earlier, the MIT calculator did not exist. The EPI calculators did not exist. Those started to happen because states like Vermont and a few other states started to develop and started to use this basic needs budget methodology. And they were able to get foundation or other funds to be able to say, well, we could do it for the whole country.
Right.
Right. And we never went with those other ones because at the time, the choices that they made, the numbers were actually always lower than ours in Vermont. Now, things are a little bit different. That's not to say that we should go with these other calculators. It's just simply, I think, as Joyce is pointing out, that there are more options, but digging into the details of like what those data sets are, and those are choices, right? Just like it's the choice of going with a child ages 4 and ages 6. Those are choices. And that's the kind of stuff that we're going to need to wrestle with. And it's what JFO has to wrestle with on their own whenever they're every other year when they're doing this report. So it's just important to keep that in mind. These are, you know, when the Peace and Justice Center, when we first started coming out with the job gap study and the different family sizes, we would always use the single person as the livable wage because that was the easiest one for people to get their head around. And it was closest to what people understood a minimum wage. Like it's the equivalent from a logic standpoint, you know? But then some point in the 2000s, I think, maybe it was after the 2008 TAC one even, the choice was made, it was a political choice, I believe, to go with the 2-person household, 2 couples together, because it ended up being the lowest number of all the family sizes. And the sticker shock of, you know, it's even in here, right? A single person in here is like $20 an hour. The sticker shock of that, as real as that number is to a lot of employers, is something that many legislators felt like we had to take into account. Because that's the real world that we're working in. But the data is the data. in terms of what it costs to live. And I think that's what you've been getting at a lot, Senator Westman, is how much there's these differentials county to county in our state, recreation communities versus non-recreation communities.
Destination.
Yeah.
Yeah, destination.
Yeah.
But it's not county to county, because within a county, you can have huge differences.
Yeah. No, you can have Cavendish and Woodstock.
So I
In South.
So I so appreciate, Joyce, you bringing up that you are looking for some additional guidance and the challenges that you all face every time you do this. It's not easy, and it's outside the norm of what you typically do. So I get that. So I so appreciate it, because what you do provide is this very important and useful reference guide that should be being used, I believe, in thinking about our public policy choices. And because you guys are so well thought of, you're completely 100% credible in your abilities to do this kind of work. That's why in 1999, folks involved in the process wanted the Joint Fiscal Office to take this on, because you are so, your reputation is so critical to people believing these numbers. So I just want to say you're trusted.
Yes, the last thing I would say is that you cannot minimize the amount of work that goes into this report. Well, and over time, JFO has taken on more subject areas. We're very much involved in the climate change space now, and green energy and so forth. We've become more involved in
Paid family leave, minimum wage, all these.
childhood education,
Childcare.
education. So we do have limited resources. So it's one more thing to think about. And we have these groups out there, MIT and EPI, who are doing this routinely every year and documenting exactly what they do, which is really helpful.
Right. So I think that given JFO's concern about the amount of work this takes, that certainly has prompted in large measure our addressing this. So, which isn't to say we don't, and you're already using, Dan already uses and refers to MIT and the EPI, so they're already being incorporated into our work. So thank you, Joyce. This was great. I think what we as a committee and with all of you, with our fabulous right arms, need to work out. I would love to address just our meeting schedule. We have 4 more meetings. So I would love to figure out days that work for us. And as much as possible, if we can have our work complete by early November, it doesn't need to be November 1st, obviously. But as early as we can, then we can consider what legislation. Our deadline on that is December 1st. So we can work back from that. But I think what I would like to propose that we will have for everybody for the next meeting, and what I would love to talk about today is not only when we meet, but how we want to map out what we want to address next. So build a continuum of what we want to address next to get to the point where we're making decisions about what we want to propose. So to that end, we have for next meeting, we have a bit of, I think, the question of who is using it, how is it being used? Doug is going to talk about some of the, I think, Doug, we're going to, I think, probably begin with Doug and some of the concerns that, Joyce has just already raised some of the concerns with where we are now with the basic needs budget. But I think we want to be looking at who's using it, how's it being used, if it's being used, look at Doug's memo, and what else would we like to be? I think we've identified things we'd like to look at in terms of more data. But I'd love to look thematically at the next 4 meetings because, and Ellen, did you have any thought, and Pat and Emily, anybody have sort of thoughts?
I think one of the big ones was to get a demographics view so we can look at the different family configurations, because I think that really drives so much then beyond in terms of what data sources we would use.
thinking about those family configurations. I think we either need to affirm them or we need to suggest that perhaps that they be looked at. And I think getting a clearer picture of current demographics of the state would be helpful, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and then coupled with that, we also asked feedback on the current, how many are currently living below the livable wage in Vermont, or the basic, what we identified in 2022 as the basic needs. I think that was another piece that we wanted to add. But in terms of themes for each meeting, this was really setting the table theme. One of the things I'd like to do, and I'm going to ask Richie maybe to join me on this, is to, or either Ashley or Elizabeth, is to talk to the chairs of the committees we think should be using this. I mean, that would logically use it. And talk to them about, do they use it? And we could bring that back to the chairs of those committees, ask them, do they use it? How do they use it? How would it be something we could work on to improve? So I think, yeah. And so Ashley and Elizabeth, maybe you'd like to chat with the House chairs. You and Elizabeth could maybe chat about that, and Richie and I can chat with Senate chairs. I think that would make some sense because we have probably 4 committees in each side, 4 or 5 that would use it to make decisions about certain things. So I think that would be an interesting piece of data. If Elizabeth, if you and Ashley would chat about who would like to divide that up and talk with approps, Ways and Means, Human Services, House General, and maybe Healthcare. Or Commerce, definitely. Commerce, Healthcare. I think you have 6 committees that are natural. And the same with us. We have Economic Development, we have approps, we have Finance, we have Healthcare and Health and Welfare, and we have, those are probably we probably have slightly fewer just because we have, and just get some of that data, I think, on who would be helpful. But as a theme for next meeting, I think we want to begin to get some of that.
I think that would be very short, though.
Yeah.
I mean, it's more, to me, that's more of a reference point for then, once we come out with the report of recommendations, then it's which committees you need to go to be able to then see about how we can get them to be using the report more, right? But Patrick, you were thinking about like breaking up the budget components over the next 2, is that what you were thinking?
Yeah, so I guess generally speaking, it sounds like you've got, at least part of the time for next meeting.
Well, we have Doug's memo and Doug that we want to hear from. I think we want to hear a little bit about from our colleagues how we're using it, and maybe we would be helpful to have we had some with Joyce's report, some of the outside people, but it'd be great to find out who at AHS is actually using it and how you're using it, and any other private, just have a check-in on additional uses of it. But your theme, you had a whole theme idea of that.
So I'll also throw out there that Public Access Institute also submitted some written testimony.
Oh, great.
And are happy to come to the next meeting and talk about that. I'm sure they would have thoughts on the question of who's using it, how is it being used, among others. But I think probably the main thrust of what our office can offer for next week has to do with that question around demographics.
Yeah.
And then, yes, Ellen is correct that our thought for the approach is to actually unpack each of these components and discuss what the methodology is.
You mean in each category?
In each category, yes.
So the 6 categories we currently have.
No, the line items in the budget.
Right, okay, so there are 2 pieces. There's the category,
the demographics will take care of the categories of family households, but
and then the food, housing, transportation, that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, and we would probably allot the most time for the components that we think require the most attention, obviously. So I think, with the other, so from hearing from the auditor, hearing from public assets, and then discussing what you've heard from the other chair members.
Right.
Our office could definitely fill the rest of that time talking about demographics, and then we can pick a few of them out.
So basic question is gonna be what Joyce raises. What are we going to include? Are we going to include any subsidies from programs that we offer? And if we do, I think this number has never had as much effect on a state budget. So there's two budgets when you talk about the budget for the individuals and the families, and what we do and what we appropriate and where we go with that. And I think producing a number to go to chairs of committee and say, are we better or worse off than we were in 1999 is a powerful number to be able to say to people, there were 60,000 people then. Now, based upon our population, if you said it's a bigger percentage of the population and we've been heading in the wrong direction, I think that's a way to get people's attention. And I think what this overall number never has done is within a budgetary process for the state got anybody's attention.
It's interesting because it's gotten a lot of attention as we discuss minimum wage. So as Joyce knows, because she worked with us closely on that. And so.
Right, but again, I think it comes back to both sides of the equation.
Yeah.
And your policy levers available to you, right? So we've got built into the tax calculations, the childcare tax credit stuff. That's a policy lever that you had already done on the revenue side, which means then that the wage is less.
Right.
And
right?
we never had the conversation about bracket creep within the income tax for families.
Yeah, but that goes to my point, which is, do we look at true costs and then look at revenue offsets to those true costs? But what are the true costs? Because they're a little buffered at the moment.
If there were no subsidies.
If there were no subsidies,
What would
and in some ways, I think that would be so stark for people. I mean, it would be a stark thing for people. And what's our objective? I mean, I would hope every Vermonter would be earning enough to live without having to use public assistance. On the other hand, public transit is public assistance. So I hope people would, but I think one of.
Anybody, I would just say to you, anybody with an EBT card just got a huge hit at the end of March.
Yeah, they did.
A huge hit. The amount of assistance going for food dropped nearly $70 million.
Right. So, but I think those are some of the questions we have to ask. And so the work that we are contemplating doing at the next meeting in terms of the deep dive of the methodology used in each one of those things, what are we calling them, the categories?
Components.
Components. So, right, okay, each one of to do a deep dive in each one of those components, we will then fully, I think, begin to understand what we want to include.
Yeah. So Patrick, given that you guys would then have to have the capacity and time to crunch whatever we ask for, what's realistic also to ask for, given that we're going to have to meet at least within the next 2 weeks?
Yep. So that goes to the next.
Are you prepared to?
Are you speaking specifically to the demographics question?
Yeah.
Well, and to the components questions, both.
Well, we won't cover all the components in the next meeting. That will be broken up certainly. I think the idea is with what time we have left, with what's not scheduled for the next meeting, we'll fill that time going through one or two, if we have time, 3 components. But to the question on
The demographics,
yeah, I mean, I think we have way forward to getting to those numbers. I have started looking at that sort of preliminarily already.
Okay.
So I certainly can have something for you, and, you know, just sort of the nature of it is, you'll think of something else that you wanna look at.
Oh,
and we can
sure.
circle back to that,
That's a
you know,
given.
at a later, at a later meeting.
Right, and I think it's key, I think what Richie asks is also critically important, which is, are we better off? I mean, where are we in terms of the gap?
I think that's basically, if you're gonna make a statement, that's where you can make a statement.
Great. So to that end, I think we have next meeting pretty fully fleshed out.
That's plenty of material.
And you think you have time to do some of the demographics?
Yes.
Okay, great.
And I would just say, you can produce a whole number on what it's gonna take and all of that. The real world is, we're never gonna do away with an EBT card. We're never gonna do away with government subsidies in this level. So the real world is a picture that includes assistance.
Well,
And we can have an effect on that. Because that happens every year in an appropriations process. So, you know, I'm much more inclined to say, how can we have an effect, even if it's just incremental in, by doing this work?
well, I hope we have an effect, or we are wasting our time.
That's why I said that.
I don't want to waste our time.
No, but, you know, yes.
So what are we thinking about for dates?
So, Chair, I would put forward that we think about next meeting on Wednesday, the 27th, which is exactly 2 weeks from today, from 9.
Doing fiscal committee meeting that morning, so
Oh,
some
we
staff
could
might
be-
be tied up. And then there's another committee meeting right after that, the transportation committee, yeah. I think that's gonna be a tough day. Sorry.
Well, that's why it's important to have everybody in the room. Okay, what does Friday, the 22nd look like? Or Tuesday, the 26th?
22nd looks good.
22nd, I have reasonably open. Is that doable for you guys if we did 9? And what's our time need? Is 3 hours a good time need? Roughly, I think we could have kept talking today. I mean, so it's already now just after our time. So it's not like there's something magic about it. I think 3 hours is a realistic amount of time that people can afford to give to. You were the.
Yeah, we can't go
Are we
more.
talking about the 22nd?
Yeah, 22nd.
22nd works for me. Fridays are generally more.
Aaron, what about you?
Friday, the 22nd is fine.
Elizabeth?
Yep, all good here.
Can we go ahead and schedule all of the
Yeah, I'd
dates?
like to do that.
That is my proposal.
Let's do it.
Richie and Ashley and Sean?
Are we saying 9 to 12?
Yeah,
We could do the morning.
yeah. Okay, morning, and Ashley, generally, is morning better for you?
Yes.
How old are your kids?
I have an 8-year-old and a 20-month-old.
Right, and a 1 year, yeah, Richie?
22nd works.
Okay, great. So let's do, if we don't hear any objections from you guys, let's do 9 to 12 on the 22nd. And hopefully Elizabeth will be better so that she and I can carpool.
Okay.
And then I might suggest that we either do Friday the 6th or Wednesday the 4th of October, the week of October 2nd. And I'll tell you why I'm suggesting this, because I'd love to get another meeting in before I am, at the moment, I think, one of the legislators going on the Taiwan trip, which is the 22nd through the 28th. So I would, if it's possible for us to get at
We
least,
should, because we gotta get 4 in.
I know, I'm working on it here, honey. So, but we could also meet after that. So if we have our second meeting on the 22nd, could we conceivably do our third meeting on the 4th or the 6th in the morning? And or, and then on the week of the 15th of October, the 18th or the 20th. So those are my questions. And that would have us have 4 meetings, and we'd have a 5th meeting, following the, in early, the first week of November. What are people looking at for October 4th or 6th and or October 18th or 20th?
Mine are fine, the 4th or 6th.
I can't do the 4th. I'm staffing a renewable energy group, but I could get somebody else to cover if you want to do the 4th. I can do the
The 6th is better. Yeah.
Okay, so Fridays, people like Fridays? You like to celebrate Fridays with the basic needs?
Yeah. Let's do that.
Allison,
Yes, Elizabeth?
I can't make the 6th at all.
Okay. Not any speck of the 6th. What does Thursday, the 5th look like for people? All I have to do that day actually is make a birthday cake for Ward. So I could do Thursday, the 5th. Elizabeth, could you do that? Aaron?
Yes. Yep.
Sorry, Richie, do you think you could do that, the 5th?
Probably.
Ashley?
That is much better than the 6th, so yeah.
Okay, well, were you gonna raise your hand and said, tell us this, we need you to be honest here.
I can't do the morning of the 5th. I could do the afternoon.
And Ashley, mornings are,
I could make an afternoon work,
okay,
as
so,
long as it's not on the 6th.
okay. So how about, what are people happier with? 1 to 4 or 2 to 5? What do people like?
What day we talking?
Thursday, the 5th.
1
What
to
do
4
people-
would work better for me.
Sorry, what, Aaron?
1 to 4 p.m. would work better for me in the afternoon.
Okay.
Great. 2 to 5 would work better for me.
What's the difference? 1:30 to 4:30?
How about 1:30 to 4:30 and split the difference? Is that okay?
That's fine.
Richie, is that okay?
I've got to go to work and figure it out.
Okay. You want,
And I'll just tell you, Wednesdays are the only day that at my work we're expected to be here.
oh,
We're
okay.
talking about Thursday, the 5th.
No,
Oh,
but
yeah, okay, gotcha.
we're gonna
Generally,
get to the
got it.
next one.
Yeah,
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, that would have been good. Okay, so let's tentatively look at 1:30 to 4:30 and then we'll confirm it at our next meeting. How about that? Does that make some sense? And then, so the following, jumping 2 weeks to the week of the 15th.
20th, you said, or 18th, but that doesn't.
The 18th doesn't work for Richie.
The 20th.
So I'm down in Brattleboro all day on the 19th for a housing thing. The 20th, would the 20th work 9 to 12 for people?
Yep.
Ashley, okay with you? Ellen?
Yep.
For me.
Richie?
Yep, great.
Sean? Aaron? Elizabeth?
I can do a partial meeting that day.
Is that
I can
okay
do
with
it.
you? What? Yeah, Elizabeth, you're okay? Okay, good.
Yep.
And Aaron, we will hope that you're, and if not, you can have the plus of these being recorded is any of us who have to miss an hour or so here or there can catch up on the recording.
Perfect.
So let's aim for
Allison?
9. Yep.
Oh, I
Yes,
was just gonna ask, is that a morning meeting?
if that's okay, 9 to 12.
Yep.
Are we all talking about the space here too?
We're talking about the State House somewhere, wherever we can
Okay.
be.
So-
I'll send
so
out
you'll send
invites
out any-
confirming. I'll
okay.
assume here, but I've got to check those dates with Sergeant at Arms. And I'll send out invites when I have the room.
Perfect. Thank you, Sorsha. Okay, I think that does us. And then do we want to just tentatively look at the last meeting, the first or second week, the first week of November?
Excuse me. This is.
Yeah.
If you all don't mind, I am late for another meeting. So if you want to send me the tentative appointment for November, I can compare my schedule, but I do have to step out now.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you so much. It's lovely to meet you.
Meet you all as well. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.
About the 2nd of November.
The second, the Thursday? I'm easy either way.
I can't do the third.
I can't.
Well, if people can't do the third, then let's do the second.
Well, the joint fiscal committee meets on November 7th. So if there is any recommendations in the report, we would want to have that adopted at the 5th meeting, right?
I know, but I don't feel like I have to do it for the joint. I mean, I don't know how other people feel, but I mean, this is a legislative concern first. I mean, joint fiscal committee, for me, works when we're not in session. So,
Well, just from a, like, if there is a technical change you want us to make to the report that's gonna come out next January, we want the joint fiscal committee to adopt it in November of 2023 so that we're ready to go to do the report that's due in January of 24. So that's the only date, but
I see. So you
that's the only
think
tweak.
it's more efficient? I see, yeah, and I guess I have a control issue on it.
Sure.
So I'm on it in a different, but I'm in the general legislator point of view, and the JFC is great, but I think of them doing important work when we're not in session.
Right.
And so if we can make a legislative, but I think we can all make, let's see where we are.
Great.
But if we meet on the second, we would still be in time if we wanted to make recommendations.
Yes. I think you can meet on the second or third.
Yeah, I think that's great.
There's one of those small methodological tweaks that doesn't require
Yeah.
a statutory change.
Yeah.
We want to try to get the JFC to do that.
Perfect, yeah. Perfect.
So Ashley said she can't do the 2nd.
The first or the second,
A couple of us can't do the 3rd.
Okay.
31st.
I can't do that day. I have 1,000 kids at my house that night. Sorry. I love you all, but that's just like.
30th?
We could do the 6th.
30th, I can't do the 6th or the 7th.
I can't do the 6th either. I think we're on
Okay.
for a long weekend.
Patrick, any sense of the last meeting would be basically making decisions? Do you have any weigh in about how much time between the 4th and the 5th that you would likely need?
So I think kind of the idea is as we go through, throughout each of these meetings, we're looking at demographics, components, all that. We're gonna be reviewing other options as we go along.
And making decisions.
Hopefully, like in the flow of things, you'll be making decisions.
Okay.
We like this, we like this, and
Okay.
we'll just keep a tally of that. So in theory, what would be great at this 5th meeting is to review the report and have you all adopt it. Recommend it, right?
Or,
Ideally.
yeah, I mean,
Are Mondays completely out?
what, my dear?
Are Mondays completely out?
No, it just Monday's out for these two on the 6th.
The 30th?
The 30th I could do
I could do the 30th.
in the morning only.
I could as well.
I don't even know if I'll be compos mentis. I mean, I may be getting back from Taiwan that day.
Oh, I
or
see.
the day before. But we can put, we can set it.
Plane.
What?
You should sleep on the.
Yes, I will plan on doing that. But doesn't mean I'll be compos mentis. So let's look at the 31st. I could conceive of, if people can do Halloween, I could do the morning of a Halloween. I think that's slightly a safer date for me.
Yeah.
Quite honestly.
That works.
And I just have to do it in the morning because I just have too many, I just am inundated. So, I know, none of you.
31st.
The 31st, does that work?
Yeah.
Elizabeth, that's okay with you? And, okay, let's.
Very apropos, given that this report was printed on the 31st of October.
Oh my God.
Just saying.
Perfect.
Is that 9 to 12?
Yes.
Yes, because I could not do it later than that.
That's number 5, is that what, is this number 5?
Yes, this would be number 5.
Exactly, yeah, exactly.
So that would be number 5. And we all have to choose an appropriate costume.
Okay.
So you're fairly warned.
All right.
Great, thank you. I think this was a terrific start. Thank you, Patrick and Saoirse and Joyce for helping, and Ellen for here. And Tom and Ellen for teeing this up so well. Thank you very much. And if we have questions in the intervening time,
Please send them.
everybody has each other's contact info. We can get your contact info, Liz and Aaron's, and it's from Saoirse. I assume. Does she also have your cell phone?
I'll get it to you.
If you could be kind enough to get Saoirse all your info, that would be great, because well, the rest of us, they have.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. This was terrific. Thanks a